Now, if you know me, you know how excited I was at the news that Hugh Jackman's Wolverine is coming back. There are not many Jackmans as huge as this one, and honestly, he might be the biggest Ackman of all time as well. I'm really excited to see this Wolverine return. I love this character so much, and you know what? Unpopular opinion that I feel like has become more popular since they went away. Probably because it's, one of those things where it's like, once it's gone, you can't have it anymore, and you kind of realize maybe some other thoughts you had about it, but I always really liked Fox X-Men. I know that it doesn't match up perfectly with the comics, and I know it's got a lot of weirdness to it. Okay, there's a lot of stuff I don't like for example, kind of replacing Kitty Pryde's role with Rogue for a while as the Wolverine understudy, or for example, going so many weird ways with the timeline that who knows what's up and down. I get it, I'm right there with you, but when it was announced that Hugh Jackman was coming back, I was super excited to see him in Deadpool 3, especially with none other than your boy, Ryan Reynolds, the legend, the myth, the man. There's a lot I'm excited about, but there are a few things that I'm a little worried about that I wanted to talk about today that I'm concerned on, that I don't want to say will ruin the movie for me if it's not the exact way I want it to be. I'm not going to be one of those people, but certainly concerns me and makes me a little cautious. So before we hop into it, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. I appreciate you very much. We are growing the channel very well, and I'm looking forward to the holiday season. Going to be a lot of fun stuff. And speaking of the holidays, there are tons of really great items over on enchantedglamour.com right now, which every purchase goes to help support the channel. We're talking comic book resin repurposed pieces from comics that were being thrown out, turned into transformative, really cool pieces of art, coasters, keychains, and more. And of course, also holiday themed jewelry, which is really amazing that my wife Jill has put a lot into. So with the holidays upcoming, I started thinking about Hugh Jackman because I'm a weirdo and I've got multiple Hugh Jackman Wolverine Funko Pops up in my room at any given time. He's always in my life. He's a constant presence. I think if there is ever a meet a fan Hugh Jackman contest, I should win by default just for being the world's biggest fanboy. But sadly, here we are on YouTube instead. And with the announcement of him coming to Deadpool 3, it's one of those things where you know that he will be back and he will deliver a solid performance, and so will Ryan, obviously. Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool is probably one of the highlights of the superhero media world, in my opinion. And if nothing else, it has really exposed a lot of people to Deadpool who didn't know anything about him before and were really missing out on not seeing that character. So to see this sort of straight man, I mean that in the comedic sense, where you have like a more serious character, down to earth, grounded, kind of angry, kind of humanized Wolverine in Hugh Jackman. And then you have this silly, happy-go-lucky, but still emotional Ryan Reynolds Deadpool. And now you're teaming them both up and you're having them interact with each other in a movie. That's a big deal to me. That's super exciting because Wolverine and Deadpool have a lot of really fun interactions in comic books, in video games, and more. And to see that on screen with two of my favorite actors in the entire world, I'm sure it will blow me away. However, one major concern I have going into it is the continuity of the films and which Wolverine this will actually be. Because there are multiple Wolverines that Hugh Jackman has played. To kind of run through some of them, he did play the original timeline Wolverine in the original Fox X-Men universe. He played the Apocalypse/Days of Future Past timeline Wolverine in the side timeline universe that then ended up kind of becoming the main universe after Days of Future Past when the timeline changed. Then, of course, he also did play the Logan version of the character in the movie Logan, which some people view as post Days of Future Past. They do view as in the canon timeline taking place after that. Other people view it as a separate, splintered off reality, its own timeline, especially given things like the comic books that are shown in the movie with the adventures of the X-Men and other stuff going on. However, again, in defense of the main timeline theory that it essentially all just ends up being one, there is also the fact that that could have been from the time of Dark Phoenix and other stuff when the X-Men were widely known. That maybe they did start getting comic books and other stuff published about them that would eventually show up in Logan, especially with the Apocalypse post-credits scene. But the point that I'm getting to, because I digress, I'm going to drive our conversation way off topic, is that the continuity is confusing because he did also play another Wolverine in Logan, which was the X-24 Wolverine, essentially the evil Wolverine clone that was not as good as Wolverine, but still a big threat because Wolverine was having healing power problems. And when it comes down to it, a big theory about this movie is that the TVA will be involved from Loki and from basically the MCU, because this is bringing Deadpool into the MCU, right? This is sort of his MCU debut. And we do know that in the past, Hugh Jackman did say that one of the things that would have made him stay as Wolverine longer was a potential team up with Avengers characters in the MCU. So it's very possible that that did actually play into his decision to return. However, none of this answers the question of what Wolverine we will actually see on screen. Are we going to see a original timeline Wolverine? Are we going to see a Days of Future Past / Apocalypse timeline Wolverine? Are we going to see the point after which his consciousness jumped back into the ending of Days of Future Past Wolverine? Or are we going to see the one from the Logan timeline? Or is the Logan timeline just a part of that other timeline? Because Fox made things so confusing, it's now at a point where it is, yes, perfect for the idea of the TVA, where you have timeline pruning and other stuff happening, right? And you have the multiverse. Of course, that does make this a very obvious candidate for a story with that, but it makes me wonder if Hugh Jackman is coming back as the Fox X-Men Wolverine I know and love, or some other one. And here's what I mean by that. If he were to come back as just Logan Wolverine, and were to say that this takes place before Logan, and Logan was its own timeline, because they do specifically mention that they're not going to touch the events of Logan in this movie. If that happens, now we have a timeline where we just randomly have events of Wolverine from two different eras in his life. If in that same vein of thought, we were to get a story set after X-Men Apocalypse, with Wolverine after that film, but before Days of Future Past, that's kind of a different character, and let me explain why. In X-Men Days of Future Past, Wolverine is jumping back and forth. The primary Wolverine that we all know and love is sending his consciousness back into the past in order to control his body in the past and help correct the timeline and prevent this pretty much horrible Sentinel future that has exterminated the mutants and pretty much put most human beings in concentration camps as well, because they have the mutant gene inside of them. So he's trying to go back and prevent that. The X-Men are basically trying to defend his comatose body in the present, which is the future, and send back his consciousness. Now, we do see that when his consciousness leaves the body in the past, his body in the past has no memory of it. It's not like he imprinted onto it and is the same exact being and person with the same memories. He's not. He's basically two separate people that share the same body because of the whole timeline shenanigans. So when we get down to brass tacks with that, once we see him reappear at the end of Days of Future Past, the very, very end of the movie, you can see that he has no memory of the events that happened in between Apocalypse and Days of Future Past. What he remembers are the events of his own timeline. And this kind of leads us to the logical conclusion, or at least a lot of fans to the logical conclusion, that the primary original Wolverine, his consciousness, his memories overwrote. They overwrote the Apocalypse timeline Wolverine, right? He essentially imprinted back onto that body again in that timeline, but had no memory of it, which to me says that that original Wolverine is now in the Apocalypse Wolverine's body, essentially. That's just what it is. I mean, the timelines kind of merge in a way, and then that's his body. That's where he is now, with the memories of the original timeline. So if you were to set a story with Deadpool in between that time period in there, when it's technically the Apocalypse Wolverine that we only get to see one real scene out of, we get to see a couple flashes of in Days of Future Past when Logan's future consciousness is kicked out, and then we get to see him escaping in Apocalypse, escaping Stryker in a different way, which is a very badass scene. Well, now this is not the same character as Prime Wolverine. Now, there are possibilities that originally the X-Men Prime Wolverine's consciousness overrode the Apocalypse body, and then, of course, later on, the Apocalypse Wolverines, that's the best way I can call him, the best name I have for him, that Wolverine's consciousness arose as well to merge with the original, and that we just don't see that in the ending of Days of Future Past. But that's really just headcanoning it. You know what I mean? That's just taking the scene and trying to say, well, after that, this must have happened if we're going to do that. Therefore, it's the same guy. Because it is the same body, obviously, same organs, same everything biologically. It's just that this dude's memories, his consciousness is essentially two different people because of when it's from. So the point I'm getting to is there's a lot of different versions of Wolverine and a lot of different implications depending on when you set this story and what that actually means. Just like how if you were to set it, say, between X2 and 3, which I don't think they'd ever do, but if they were, well, then you have that timeline that got wrote out of existence, so that wouldn't make sense because we also see Deadpool in the timeline of the Apocalypse characters. So in conclusion to all of this, my biggest concern is that we're not going to see the prime Wolverine we all love. Now, do I think that this will happen? No, I think it would be pretty silly. I think it'd be pretty dumb. And I think the fact that Ryan Reynolds already said that they're watching for Logan and not making any mistakes with that, they're not going to mess with that ending or touch that, and that they view it as its own separate thing, whether that means in continuity or just in terms of we can't touch that, that has to be the ending. I think either way, that already shows enough care that they are probably going to get this right. However, I just think it's worth mentioning because it's something that does worry me, especially now that we're moving into the MCU. And as much as I've liked some products in the MCU Phase 4, things like the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I'll say the Falcon in the Winter Soldier, that's what a lot of the fandom wants to see, but I'm talking about the show, not the ship. I really like that. I like Spider-Man No Way Home, and I enjoyed WandaVision and some other stuff. Even though I like some of this, I also do think there's been some quality fall off in Phase 4 where certain things aren't as exciting or not as well thought out. So because of that, things like that, or perhaps getting CGI wrong, are just things that I personally worry about a little bit with this that I wanted to get your opinion on. Now, I don't expect the GOATs, Ryan Reynolds or Hugh Jackman or Kevin Feige or anybody to watch this video and like, oh, Degenerate Jay said this, we got to make some major changes. But it's more just like a discussion in the fandom, from me to you guys, kind of getting your thoughts on it and what you think. Because I love this character. I can't wait to see him back. And you know what? Either way, I'm going to be happy to see Hugh back on screen interacting with Deadpool. It's just I don't really want it to be Amnesiac, Hugh Jackman, Wolverine, or a Wolverine that we have only seen like once. I want this to be basically the Wolverine we all know and love, and I'd also at some point like some clarification on the timeline. I know someone in the comments will post clarification on the timeline, but I do have my reasoning for why I say it's complicated, one of them being that James Mangold had different opinions on it than Hugh Jackman had on it, than the Marvel database has on it, than Reddit has on it, than YouTube comments have on it. There's a lot of different takes on how these timelines play out. When Logan originally launched, it was pretty much accepted that it was just the end of the X-Men timeline. Nowadays, it's actually pretty widely debated whether or not it was or not. So in conclusion with that, I just think that there's a lot of subtleties and gray areas in the Fox X-Men universe and timelines and versions of characters that make this a complex thing to execute. But if anyone's going to execute it well, I do believe it's Ryan Reynolds, and I don't personally believe that Hugh Jackman would have come back, no matter the amount of money they threw at him, if they didn't have some kind of solid plan that at least on paper looked good to him. He seems to me to be someone who very much values the integrity of the character and what they do with him, and is extremely disappointed when the ball is dropped in any regard involving that character. It's very, very special to him, and one of the reasons it's so special to me is because he treats it with so much class, finesse, and specialness. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I appreciate you very, very much. And of course, again, one final time, moving into the holiday seasons, we're doing our best to get content out there, leave you entertained, have a fun time, talk with you. And over on enchantedglamour.com, there's a wide variety of things that you can check out that help support the channel. We appreciate you very, very much. Like I said before at the beginning, comic book resin, keychains, ashtrays, coasters, an amazing jewelry collection based towards winter and also year-long stuff. It's all fantastic, high-quality stuff my wife has been working very, very hard on. And if I don't bring this up, you might hear the weapon pushed to the back of my skull actually be activated. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But it's really great stuff. I love it very much. I love her very much, so I hope you'll check that out. And we also have Patreon, a thriving Discord community where you can hang out and talk about all kinds of stuff with us and other people who are very, very kind, big sweethearts. Twitter, and a bunch of other stuff in the description down below I hope you'll check out. Have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shui.